can. Closed session?
I'm a man of my word. Okay, get with me because I'll certainly let you know.
Good evening, everyone. We'd like to call our Fayetteville City Council special budget meeting to order. I think they'll adjust this volume here in a minute. At this time, we'll have the invocation. We'll open with invocation. Because it's not a regular council meeting, we don't have the rotating clergy we normally have access to, but we have a number of them on the dais with us. So, Councilmember Wright, would you mind?
Let us pray. Father, in the name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, we thank you for this session of the budget meeting. Critical decisions must be made, God, here tonight and in the future for the betterment of this great city and the citizens thereof. Bless this council, Lord, that we make wise decisions. Lead us and guide us with all prudence, God, concerning the taxes and the monies of the people. Help us, oh God, and we will glorify your name forever, that this city may be the greatest city in the state and in this country. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Council, item 4.0 is the approval of the agenda. Can we have a motion to approve the agenda? Okay, and I'll give us time to get our iPads up to speed. Okay, well, if not, we'll work by hand. So it's a motion by Councilmember Harris, seconded by Councilmember Ingram. Was you, right? Okay. Discussion on the motion? Madam Attorney? Okay, so Councilman Harris, if you could amend the motion to include the closed session request as the first item.
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor. I also make a motion that we I'll go into a closed session as our first item.
So we'll do approval of the agenda, including the closed session, then I'll come back for a separate motion for that. To clean
Sir,
it up.
sir.
All right, so Yes. So Councilmember Ingram, you accept the friendly amendment? Okay. All right. Any discussion on the motion? Those in favor, hands. Show of hands. All right, Madam Clerk, motion carries unanimous. And now, if we can have a motion to go into closed session for economic development.
So be it, Mayor.
All right. There's a motion by Councilmember Wright, seconded by Councilmember Hare, for go into closed session. Any discussion on that motion? Those in favor, show of hands. All right. Motion carries. Non-essential personnel.
Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, members of council. Kelly Oliveira, Budget and Evaluation Director. This is our first of 3 budget work sessions for the fiscal year 2023 annual budget. Our next 2 will be the subsequent 2 Thursdays, again, starting at 5 o'clock here in council chambers. So tonight's agenda, we're gonna go over, we're gonna establish our parking lot. I don't know how many of you guys remember in years past, we would have a parking lot for items that you guys wanted to discuss further, potentially add or change in our budget. We would kind of track those over the course of the work sessions and then bring them up at the final work session for consensus from council. Tonight, we also have our compensation study presentation. We're gonna touch base briefly on our sales tax revenues again, just as a refresher from the things we discussed earlier in the week. And we do have our peer cities information for you guys this evening. In addition to the slide that'll be in my PowerPoint, we have a handout for each of you guys, which is more comprehensive than what we could fit on our slide. And then we'll give you an ARPA and a legislative update. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mr. Mark Holcomb from Evergreen Solutions. He has been our project manager for us on our compensation study. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks. Thank you so much, everybody, for having me and give me the chance to talk to you tonight. My name is Mark Holcomb, as was just mentioned, from Evergreen Solutions. And I do have a presentation to talk to you today about the compensation study that we've conducted and to bring forward some information for you all to consider and understand as we move forward. In the presentation tonight, I'm going to start off by talking about some study goals, as well as the project phases that we've undergone to get us to this point here. And so those will be a little bit of recap. We'll sort of be talking about some of the things that we've done up until this point. We will share some of the employee comments that we heard when we came out and visited in person and met with your employees to talk about compensation and classification. We will share some of the current system findings as well. So those current system findings detail what you're doing with compensation right now, where we found some strengths that you want to continue to leverage going forward, and where we found some concerns and areas that we did want to make some recommendations on. Then we'll finish up by talking about the market results. When we did go out to the market, make those comparisons between your positions and the pay that you have available here versus what is available at other organizations in the market, and the recommendations. So those recommendations that we brought forward to the city for your consideration will be shared at the end. So the study goals that we laid forth at the beginning of this compensation and classification study were really twofold. There were 2 main things that we wanted to keep in mind throughout the process. One of those was to focus on internal equity with your compensation systems. And so internal equity relates to how positions relate to one another within the city. If you have 2 different positions or 2 different individuals who are performing the same job tasks, the same duties, they're working at a similar level of leadership and complexity, you would typically expect those positions to have a similar range of compensation available to them. Likewise, if you have one position that is more complex than another, a position that has more leadership than another, you might expect that position to again be compensated at a higher level. And so we did keep that in mind throughout the engagement, looking at those relationships between positions, looking for compression between positions or between individuals, and trying to account for that where we could. But the other thing we kept in mind was the external equity piece. So looking out at the market. I'm sure I don't have to tell anybody here how competitive the job market is right now. I think everybody's feeling that really across the country, but certainly over here, in North Carolina as well. And so looking at that external equity piece, making sure that you're able to be competitive with the market, making sure you're able to recruit and retain employees was also a main focus of the study. So when we get to the recommendations at the end, please keep in mind everything that we did looked at both internal and external equity. It was not as simple as just saying, here's the market average and that's going to be the exact starting pay, because again, we did want to look at that internal piece, make sure that the positions lined up in a way that maximized internal equity as well. We did have 4 major phases of the engagement. Phase 1 was outreach. It's really about us kicking off the project, getting to know the organization that we're working with, and meeting the project team here at the City of Fayetteville. We did collect a lot of data, and so in Phase 1, we collected data from HR, compensation data, job descriptions, classification-based data. We also, as I mentioned before, reached out to employees to collect data from them. So we collected information from employees on what their specific job tasks and duties are, to make sure that we had the best understanding that we could of the work that's performed by employees every single day. We move from Phase 1 into Phase 2, which is the internal analysis. So in that internal analysis, again, before we go out to the market, we want to make sure we really understand the system that you're using now, the strengths and the weaknesses. There's an assessment of current conditions, which is a set of analyses that we conduct to see, again, where is that compression? Where do we need to be looking when we go to the market? What are the positions of most concern? Things of that nature. We also review, it alludes to the JATs in Phase 2 there. That's our job assessment tool survey. So that's the opportunity that employees had to provide us information on their specific job titles. Phase 3 then is the external analysis, so going out, doing that compensation study and really trying to figure out what your market position is right now and what is your desired market position as well. So really asking those questions about how do you compare to the wider job market. Phase 4, the solution, that's where we are now. Again, we've recommended some different implementation options. We've discussed with your city staff here some different options that they can consider. And then we'll talk about later in the presentation the recommendation that we have that we believe does address your needs here both internally and externally, as well as meets the fiscal constraints that you have in a local government. The final step in Phase 4 is that reporting phase. It includes things like this presentation tonight, but it will also include a written report that again will be able to be shared and has a lot more detail than I'm able to go into in a short presentation like this. So when we look back at those employee meetings where we met directly with employees and heard from them about the positive things that they love about working here for the city, the things that are keeping them here, as well as the concerns that they had, we did want to summarize for you tonight a few of the things that we heard, again, both on the positive side as well as some of the concerns. One of the things that employees did mention, a positive aspect of their employment, is the benefits package that they have. Employees mentioned that they understand that potentially they could be making more money in the private sector, but they want to work here because they do have a great benefits package, and they really feel some pride about working in their local community. Culture was another thing that was mentioned by a number of employees. The quality of people that employees work with is one of the things they mentioned, that they said, hey, I love my coworkers. I feel like I'm working with a talented group. I like the people that I am working with right now. And employees did also mention the opportunities afforded by working in an organization that can still grow. They feel like they have the opportunity to move up and really to make a career for themselves here. Stability was the last one that was mentioned. And again, stability has been something that we've heard, certainly over the last couple years with a little bit of unpredictability in the job market. So that stability, some people did say, hey, I've stayed here for as long as I have because I like that stable job where I understand when I'm going to be working, what I'm going to be doing, and I'm working at a city that's going to be here, long after I am. Some of the concerns, though, that we did hear, one of them was external equity. So certainly there was some mixed feedback on external equity. Some employees were very concerned about external equity. There were people who shared that they potentially could have gotten more money elsewhere. They chose here for whatever reason, but they said, hey, but I still don't think that means the pay here is where it needs to be. There were those concerns about, employees feeling like, how can I advance through my career? How can I stay here as long as I would like to if my salary is not where it needs to be as compared to the market? You did have concerns about internal equity as well. Certainly, employees having concern about compression was a big thing that was mentioned. I do have a few slides in a moment talking about compression, so we will come back to that in a bit. But again, compression, particularly between different employees of different levels, was something that was mentioned a lot during the outreach focus groups that we held. The other one that we mentioned was pay movement over time. So employees were concerned that the amount of pay increase that they got each year did not account for the true rise in the cost of living in the area. Again, certainly we all understand the inflation that's happened over this past year, but employees even said before that they really felt like, hey, they wanted to make sure if they did stay here, they certainly weren't moving backwards versus cost of living. They really wanted to feel like they were making gains as they become more experienced and grow in their proficiency at their jobs. So with the current system findings, sort of the main takeaways from our assessment of current conditions, you do have excellent customizable pay structures right now for different employee groups. That does let you administer targeted compensation for those different groups of employees with the different pay structures. And you do have consistent structures among those employees as well. So the exempt employees, non-exempt, public safety step plans, again, you've got that consistency within each pay plan so that employees understand if they're in this pay structure, here's how they could advance into the future if they are to move up through the scale, if they are to receive an increase or a promotion to another job. While we talk about some of the strengths, though, again, we did find some weaknesses that we do want to talk about. Compression was the big one, and we will have two different exhibits where we'll talk and basically show you on the screen exactly what the compression looks like. So compression is one of the big ones. The midpoint progression as well was something that we did look at. The midpoint progression not being consistent between pay grades. So if you had an employee who moves up one pay grade, potentially that would be a 6.2% increase in some areas of some pay plans. Other places it would be as much as 15%. And so again, looking for a little bit more consistency with those increases would help you to be able to better target your pay versus the market. So back to that first concern, again, as I mentioned, was the big one, talking about compression. There are two different types of compression I want to talk to you about tonight. One of them is range compression, and so that's employees who are in the same job, who are potentially doing the exact same thing or very similar things, but their pay is not significantly varied depending on whatever factor you want to look at. Here in this exhibit, we'll talk about time. So you may think of an employee who's been in their job for 15 years, somebody else was hired last year, and they're making the same amount of money. So that's obviously a type of compression that we do want to look at. It can cause low morale, it can cause turnover, and so we'll share some about that with you tonight. The other type of compression that we'll talk about is rank compression. That's the compression between an employee and their supervisor. And so with the rank compression that we have, again, this is an employee, maybe they're making $15 an hour, their supervisor's making $16. So really, is that extra dollar an hour, is that enough to compensate the supervisor for the additional responsibility they have, for the additional hours potentially that they would have to work, for the additional complexity that they're expected to be able to deal with? And so moving into our first exhibit, we do start with the rank compression exhibit. The main thing I want to point out to you is the green color represents the employees who have at least 20% space between themselves and their supervisors. So the green color does represent, again, areas where we would say you don't seem to have any issue whatsoever. There is enough space there. That yellow is where you start to get closer. You don't have overlap yet. You don't have an employee making more than a supervisor, but you do have people potentially making 5 to 10% less than their supervisor. Again, in those particular areas, you would say this is some compression we want to start looking at. So the yellow is pick the yellow for a reason, sort of that caution zone, and there's a lot of it that we found. There's a lot of relationships where frontline employees might be encroaching on or getting closer to their supervisors. The orange and the blue colors at the top, that is the most concerning areas that we actually have worked with HR and provided reports that show exactly where these instances are occurring. And again, those are the areas of compression where you have employees who are either within 5% or have even surpassed their supervisor. You may have some instances where that makes sense in rare cases. You could have an employee who's been here for 30 years and a brand new supervisor, for example. Maybe you have an engineer who's highly, highly technical and a supervisor who really doesn't need to require the same skill. But those are the exceptions rather than the rules, we would typically say. And so again, this compression, we did find more of it than we were hoping, and certainly more than I think we'd be comfortable with going forward. The other exhibit talks about the range compression. And so the range compression, you will see there is a lot of it at the bottom of the pay scales. So if you look here from left to right, you do have the non-exempt pay scale starting at the left, and those employees there at the bottom of those scales. The orange and the blue, again, represents those employees who are experiencing the highest degree of compression within their pay range. And so while some of your pay grades are actually doing pretty well in this respect, you'll notice again on the left-hand side of the exhibit, it goes from 0 to 100. That shows the percentage of employees in each pay grade experiencing that compression. And in some of those pay grades, specifically again in those non-exempt ranges, you do see 30 or even 40% of employees in a pay range in some instances, again, experiencing that compression. And so this is something that we definitely want to point out. This is where the market is moving right now. This is where you're seeing a lot of turnover. It is those sort of, some of them entry level, but some of them not. Some of them skilled trade, skilled labor type of positions. You are seeing a lot of competition there. So to see that compression, to see those employees not moving through the ranges and really experiencing the compression between employees, of up to 30 or 40% in some cases, in some ranges, was an area that we did want to point out and look to address with our recommendations. So moving out into the external market to make some of those comparisons externally versus the internal that we've been talking about to this point, we do have a list over to the right-hand side of the market peers that provided responses for this survey. And so we do have 20 different peers there listed. Again, you'll see 11 different cities from the state as well as 5 counties. So those are the organizations, again, on the right-hand side that provided data that we were able to compare against. We did look at, given the employees who are able to work remotely now, given the number of employees that we have here in the local area, we did compare salaries directly to see what is the salary they're actually paying in the other organization versus what are they paying, here in Fayetteville. And we did compare 115 different positions. So that really allowed us to get an excellent view of the entire organization from bottom to top, across departments, across job families, and really look and be able to come back and make a pretty good statement on where the market position is for each area. We did have an average response of more than 6 matches per position. Again, that's a healthy response rate where we are able to say, some of them came back with, significantly more matches. There were a few that came back with only 1 or 2 matches. We would have excluded those positions in those cases. And so again, with 115 different positions, it makes sure that you do have some of that margin for error in case you don't get matches on a certain position. But with looking at those responses, what did we actually return? What does it actually look like comparing to the market? And so we looked at the market in a couple of different ways. We did look at directly at the market, just looking at the median response that came back, and we really found you're doing okay versus the market in that respect. You are trailing the market at the midpoint and the maximum, but again, not by a significant amount. But we also looked at a slightly more competitive market position to say, well, what if we really want to go directly toe-to-toe with those peers who are taking employees from you? Not comparing to the bottom of the market, but really comparing to say, which are the organizations that we believe are going to take the employees from us. And there again, there is a small adjustment. You do see from about 3 to 6% behind market in that case. With either of these market positions that you look at, I do want to emphasize this looks at current data. So the pay that is actually available right now to employees. And the reason I emphasize that is we are in a very hot job market right now. organizations across the country are raising pay. And so you might look at it and say, well, great, we're only 3% behind, or we're not behind at all, again, depending on how you want to look at it. But I do want to emphasize that, again, if action's not taken, that will not be the case next year, I can assure you that. So your peers are going to move, and I do want to emphasize that's one of the reasons we came back with the recommendations that we did, is to make sure you're able to stay competitive with your pay ranges. The other thing I'll mention here is these exhibits right now do not consider compression at all. These are the pay ranges, not the employees. In the previous couple slides, we talked about the employees within their pay ranges. So both of those aspects are important to consider, both the employee's actual pay as well as the pay range. So moving forward to the recommendations, we do have some recommendations to lay before you that talk about and really address each of the different concerns that we had. The number one recommendation we had, or really the first thing that you have to do when adjusting compensation, is look at your pay plan, look at your ranges, and where are they aligned. So the first thing we did is recommend updates to your pay plan. We do maintain the overall customizable approach that you have with your current pay plan, so dividing out by each of the different employee groups. We kept that consistency again so that you can continue to leverage that strength that you had. The second thing that we do, though, once we say, okay, here's what the pay scales are going to look like, here's what the ranges are going to look like, we did reassign pay grades to positions based on internal equity and the market. So as I mentioned in the very beginning, I'll sort of tie back to that. It's not as simple as saying, what's the market average? Let's put a position there. We did consider the internal relationships that your positions have. You may have certain positions that your market peers may not have. You may utilize certain positions in a different way, either with more complexity in leadership or less. And so we did consider that with all of the recommendations we made. We considered the placement via internal and external equity. So placing those positions, again, talks about the actual jobs, the pay ranges from minimum to maximum. That third step, again, is placing the employees within their pay ranges. So once you've got the pay ranges established, once you've got the positions put into the pay ranges, then you have to put the employees into those positional pay ranges. And we did work with, again, your city staff to make a recommendation that we believe addresses the things that we've talked about to this point, looks at the market, looks at compression, and we believe moving forward, again, we do have an implementation option that would work for you all. We did provide 6 different solutions ranging in cost from only about $600,000 to more than $6 million. And so again, this really was, well, how much is the absolute minimum we can do? What would be the absolute most we could do to address every single bit of compression, to look at every single thing we could change and adjust and be as aggressive as we could with those different options, based on, again, internal and external equity, as well as the financial constraints that, again, we understand what you're dealing with working with your city staff. We are recommending a class parity solution capped at 50% increases for this upcoming year, because that does address the compression. So we'll talk more about that in just a moment, about that class parity option, and we'll show you a little bit more detail on that in a moment. We did also make recommendations, of course, to the public safety step plans. We are recommending increasing the ranges, but for fiscal year 23, public safety employees would stay on their existing step. So the scales would move, the salaries would move for those employees, and if you're on, for example, step 3 this year, you would remain on step 3 as well. So with the implementation, again, that class parity option does cost about $2.9, almost $3 million for salary only cost. Again, this is something we did work with your city staff on, and so they're aware of these costs, and we have worked together on making sure that it is going to be something you can afford. What the class parity option does is it looks at the amount of time you've spent in your current job title, and it gives you a projected salary based on that time. So when I talked before about the compression that you feel because an employee maybe has been in their job for 10 or 15 years and a brand new hire comes in and they're making the same amount of money, That's exactly what the class parity option is designed to address. So the class parity option adjusts employees for that compression to correct the compression, again, based on that class years basis. We do also address, it's not directly by the class parity option, but we did also address in this cost here the rank compression as well, by ensuring that the pay grades are sufficiently spaced between employees and supervisors as well. So with this 2.9, almost $3 million, that does address both types of compression that we are looking at, the range and the rank compression. Continuing on with the cost, this here shows the costs for the step plan increases that we'll have to those plans here for the public safety employees. So again, for those public safety employees, there were a few different options here, closest step, same step, and next step. And again, that same step option is what we're recommending, so that those public safety employees, they will move. You'll notice over to the right, it's about a 5% increase. That's the projected increase that employees would receive. The only thing that wouldn't change is that step number that an employee is sitting on. So with the next steps in the study, we are not completely finished after tonight. We do have some additional things that we'll be working on to make sure, again, that we close you out in a strong fashion here. One of the things that we're going to be doing is reviewing the recommendations that we have with departments. We are going to be hosting meetings with department leaders. Those are going to be set up, again, by your internal staff here to set up meetings with us. But if a particular department does see something in their area where they say, I'm not sure that this is right, this might cause us an issue, we'd like you to take another look at that, we are setting aside the time to make sure that we're able to address any of those concerns that come out. It is common that there will be some things that departments will say, hey, we'd like to see this change. We'll take another look. Maybe they can provide additional input to us. Sometimes, I know the job surveys that we conducted, again, were months and months ago. If the department says something has changed since then, that's some of the things that we want to make sure we capture here. And so those reviews with departments will be the next step that we're undergoing to make sure we address any individual concerns that are coming out at the department level there. After that, we will be working on communicating all of this with employees, as well as submitting a written report. So those things sort of go hand in hand, again, because part of that communication plan is making sure that we've documented everything for the employees, for anybody who wants to read and see, hey, what exactly did they do? Beyond the recommendations I've made tonight, it'll detail those in writing, with some additional information included in that written report. And so that'll sort of be the finalization of the implementation plan there. The last step of the study will be updating and creating new job descriptions or classification descriptions. So we do work, again, directly with your HR to provide you with updated classification specifications to make sure that when we leave this study, you have an updated record of what everybody is doing, what they're performing, what the job tasks are for employees. That does factor in the information we collected over the course of the study, including those job assessment tool surveys. So for your employees who took the time to sit down in detail, here are the tasks I'm responsible for. Here are the tasks I perform every single day or week or month. We will be able to factor those into your updated job descriptions from here. So that's the end of my presentation. We do have a little bit more to share, so I'll pass it over to your HR director to share a few slides, but I will be here to address any questions as well after he continues on.
Thank you, Mark. It's been a pleasure to work with Mark and his team. Where's mine? Let's see. All right. So, good evening. Jerry Klipp, Director of Human Resource Development here for the city. I wanted to start off with this slide, which I always like to start with, about employer of choice. We talked about this probably a year to a year and a half ago. And you'll notice that competitive compensation is one of these pillars down here. And so it definitely falls in line. And then the other thing I want to mention to you is our employee value proposition, which is what we promise to our employees and what they promise to us, which is the city of Fayetteville invests in you, employee, so you can invest in our community. So really, a lot of what we're talking about tonight is investing in our employees. So the last time we had a comprehensive salary survey, and I wasn't here, of course, so I kind of had to look back in history, but it looked like it was back in 2012. And at that time, we implemented minimal implementation of the recommendations in 2013, I believe. Since that time, we've continued to review all of our positions in the city, at least 25% of them, for market competitiveness each year to kind of help us to understand where we are with market. And what we've tried to do is keep up with the market by moving positions to higher pay grades and moving employees to minimum only. And this has caused a lot of the compression, I think, that Mark spoke about. Because when you move employees only to the minimum, then those that have been in that position for a while that were at $15, let's say, and you bring everybody else up to $15, it causes all that compression and tightness around the bottom of the pay grade. And I saw a lot of that when I first came in. And then you recall that we moved all employees to a minimum of $15 last year. So that caused, what's that? Okay, all regular, full, and part-time positions, yes, to a minimum of $15. And again, that continues to cause that compression issue that Mark talked about. And then since then, in the last year or two, we've increased salaries for police officers, specifically, and other various positions throughout the organization. As you know, and Mark alluded to, this last year and a half or so with COVID has been a game changer for us, for everybody, actually. And, you know, you hear the term, the Great Resignation, and all employers are really suffering right now in recruitment and retention. And just to give you a little bit of sample for what's happened with us, the turnover rate in July of 2020, which is right before I came, was about 12.7%. And then the last turnover rate we have right now is March of this year. It rose to 14.9, almost 15%. What's interesting is applications received in June of 2019 was a little bit over 1,000 applications. And in March of 2022, we're down to 769. And as I understand it, even before June of 2019, we're up to around 2,000 per month. So there's been a significant decrease there. So our recommendations, July 18th of this year, again, as Mark mentioned, the step plans will remain the same, the pay grades will remain the same. But what we're recommending is that general full-time and part-time employees will have an opportunity to receive up to 4% of midpoint merit pay. And then in August is when we're going to implement some of the recommendations from the compensation study itself. So the new step plans will be implemented along with associated increases. And again, as Mark mentioned, no employee will change the steps, but pay will change based on the new step plan. So they'll get an increase, but they'll be in the same step plan number. And then for the pay grades, the same thing, new pay grades will be implemented, and we're going to implement half of the class parity solution that Mark talked about to the affected employees. And that's the end of the presentation. What questions do you have? Mark, you can join me up here.
All right, Councilmember Ingram has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. So I have very quick questions. The peer cities that you shared within your consulting, have you worked with any of them to do this similar work?
I believe we have worked with some of the peer cities. Without seeing them up on the list, I can't tell you how many, but yeah, I believe we have worked with a few of them, if not, you know, concurrently, again, over the past few years.
Okay, and so, thank you, Mr. Clip, with this proposed plan, is it possible to start at the lowest to ensure that they get up to whatever they need to be? Because I believe I understand that some people are not even at 15 an hour. So could we start backwards versus, I don't know what, you know, the inner workings of the plan is, but to ensure, as we see rents rising, to ensure that as we're, raising our salaries for the individuals, our employees, can we kind of start back with the lower end to push that up?
So a few things, and let me clarify the $15 an hour. All of our regular full-time and part-time employees are at least at $15 an hour. It's the temporary employees, mostly with Parks and Rec, that are under that amount. And yes, we are, actually, one of the things that we're changing is the pay grade, and the lowest pay grade, the minimum is now $15. So that's one of the things that we're changing. And in addition to that, when we're looking at the compression issue, I would say there's 600 some employees affected with that, and most of those are in the lower pay grades, because that's where we're seeing most of the compression.
Then my final question is, even with that 15, how can we at least push that up to at least be 17, so our minimum is 17?
Oh, that would
That's something we need to determine or give direction to?
require
Okay.
a calculation of numbers, yes.
Okay,
All right.
thank you.
Councilmember Kinston, then I have a question.
Thank you, Mayor. The question I have, it may actually go towards, this is so loud, City Manager. So, thank you so much for the presentation. It was a lot of information. It's good to see what's happening. The question that I have is, with the recommendation, is that immediately affecting the budget that we're talking about now, or is, because it looks like it's all future changes?
If adopted as presented, it would address the recommendations that were on Mark's last slide. And it would also set the stage for what we discussed at the budget presentation on Monday and in our small group meetings. This is an investment, and it takes us partly the way there. Next year, this time, when we're back in this room and having this conversation again, we already know that we potentially are 50% in the hole. And so this is something that we're going to have to really nourish. I can't remember the last time we did an entire compensation study. As said, we try to do it on 25% of our positions each year. But the labor market keeps going up, and up. But this, if adopted, we do believe would address the most significant issues which are there, and would be in effect on July 1st. And the employees would be eligible for the money on the pay period right after July 1st.
4%,
Yes.
yes. And then the comp recommendations will be in August.
Okay, so let me make sure I understand. So if it's adopted or approved, then you're saying that because we don't start the new budget until July 1, so it will be, it's already factored in on the new budget,
Yes, ma'am, if approved.
if approved. Okay, so the other question I have is, when you're talking about doing, reviewing the assessments of jobs and possibly looking at combining the jobs, if I understood you correctly. So I want to make sure, even with possibly combining jobs or looking at job titles, that there's no loss of employees when you're doing that.
No, there won't be no
Okay.
loss of employees, to answer your question. When we're talking about combining, is that what when Mark was presenting?
I'm not sure which one of you mentioned it,
Okay.
but it talked about streamlining the positions and comparing them. And normally when that happens, sometimes there's positions that are eliminated. So if those positions are eliminated, then where do they go? So I just want to make sure that as you're having that conversation, that we're not talking about losing employees due to the realigning of those job titles.
Right, no, that's not even in the discussion at this point. I think what I think it was Mark that was saying it was really about looking at the duties and responsibilities, skills, abilities, knowledge, and all that sort of thing of jobs, and looking and comparing and seeing which ones are similar to know where they need to rank, basically. So,
Okay.
but yeah,
All right.
there's no talk of elimination of positions.
Okay. And then just the last comment, as I came on council, I was an advocate to make sure that we at least got to the $15 an hour at least starting, so I do appreciate that. I know there are some concerns with temporary employees, and I do have some concerns with that, so I'll look forward to that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Kinson. So thank you so much for the presentation. Good to see you, Mr. Clip. And Mark, what firm are you with?
Evergreen Solutions.
Evergreen Solutions. Okay, well, we appreciate you doing that. Do you remember how much you all charged to do this?
I do not know that off the top of my head, no, I'm sorry.
Money team, do y'all remember how much this cost?
Not right off the top of my head either, so I apologize. I can get that to you.
Can we get it tonight?
Yes, sir,
Okay.
absolutely.
So, did have a couple questions. So, you made a distinction between full and part-time regular employees. So, tell me what other kind of employees make up the city's payroll?
Then we have temporary employees, which again are mostly work in Parks and Rec. They're the ones that are like referees and lifeguards that are kind of seasonal, so they don't necessarily, well, they don't work for us full-time, but maybe work for a season for a few weeks in the summer or.
So, they provide some pretty pertinent activities. When we can't have pools without lifeguards, can't have games without referees, right? So so that crowd is not included in the minimum $15, so how much are they being paid?
So I have that information, I'm sorry to interrupt. So we have 8 positions, and they're temporary seasonal positions is what they're classified as. So they are field supervisor that is currently paid $10 an hour, gym supervisor that is also $10 an hour, the lifeguards that are at $11.75, lead lifeguards are $13.75, and water safety instructors are $12.75, rec assistants are $10, rec program assistants are $12, and our score, our timekeepers are at $10 an hour.
So even though we've had a significant increase in gas and all of these kind of things, these people still have the same demands to come referee games, watch our children at the swimming pool, do some very important functions that make us a better place. How did they get missed from the $15 instruction the council gave? That's probably a question for the manager, I guess.
Yeah, I
So
can't,
how many employees? You said we only have 8?
it's 8 positions, yes, and that is a rotating pool of people.
Yeah, I'm speaking to the positions, not the person.
Yes, sir, 8 positions.
So, I do know that was a very important thing to make sure that everybody, regardless of distinction, was at least 15, because they still face the same challenges. Part-time people still have to drive to work just like part-time seasonal people. So that is something that would like to hear what the impact would be, budgetary impact would be, to raise that to the minimum 15.
Yes, sir, we are working on getting that total cost impact and estimate for you. I can tell you, I ran some quick math on this earlier today. So for each hour that those 8 positions work, including benefits, it would be another $35.04 an hour in total to bring all of those positions up.
That's
includes-
collectively for all 8 positions?
Collectively, yes, sir. And that includes bumping up the lead lifeguard to $17 an hour. They're currently $2 an hour more than the lifeguard, so that's keeping that same $2 distance in between them. And the water safety instructor is currently $1 an hour more than the lifeguard, and so that's putting them at $16 an hour. The other positions would just be brought up to 15.
Okay, but you don't know the overall impact of that?
I do not. We've reached out to Parks and Rec, and they're pulling for us some historical data on how many hours those positions work on average in a year, so that we can get you a total annual impact for that.
Okay. All right. And did you ever get any information on the evergreen fees?
I did. The contract was $85,000.
Okay, so 80. Okay. All right. Councilmember Ingram and then Mayor Pro Tem.
So,
It was Davis, Mayor Pro Tem, and then Ingram, since you had one already, so second round.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to echo, I thought we were pretty clear. We didn't make any separation or distinction between seasonal. I know when I've been talking to citizens, I've been bragging on the city, committing to paying anyone who works for the city of Fayetteville no less than $15 an hour. And I don't think I'm the only council member who's been saying that. So
You're
we
right,
need to make
sir.
sure that is reality.
You're right, sir.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem and then Councilmember Ingram.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Wow, that is on. So I guess my question is, I'm talking about the temporary work, and I think where the concern is that the temporary employees that come in, let's say they come and they referee a game that can last 2 hours. So they drive 20 minutes to the game, they work 2 hours, and then they go home. And I guess as a small business owner, the rule of thumb is if you're not going to work 4 hours, it's not worth anybody to come in. It's not fair because of the way it pays. So I think that's one of the biggest issues on the temporary employees. So I will say I will support that, especially if they're working less than, the 4 hours. It just doesn't make sense. But my first question is, I heard you say, Ms. Oliveira, that if they get the benefits, do our temporary employees get benefits too, or did I mishear that? I could have misheard that.
No, ma'am, you heard me correctly. So we are required to pay FICA and Medicare and workers' comp.
Okay.
On all of our employees.
Yes.
So those are the two benefits that we have to pay for every single
Okay.
employee.
That's really not a benefit. So that's where I got confused.
It is
Okay.
an expenditure for us.
Correct.
So I always include that in our cost.
Okay, so it's not like health insurance, 401K, it
No,
is the,
It's
what
not
you,
retirement. it's
price
not
of doing
401K.
business and having an employee?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Councilmember Ingram.
Yeah, so thank you. As it relates to the temporary employees, I want to talk about the temp agencies that we use and when we bring them in. What rate are we, is it per position? And also, if we're bringing them in for a position, is that rate that temp person is getting from the temp agency, is it aligning with what we would pay if they were our employee?
Well, typically, a temporary agency will charge more for the employee, and I'm not sure exactly what they pay to their employee, but I would be pretty comfortable in saying we're probably pretty competitive.
Okay, yeah, so the temp agencies definitely don't pay their employees what they should kind of be getting if they are coming in as a temp. But then I also would like to know is when a temporary person that's coming from a temp agency and they're doing this temp work, what is the rate that we actually hire that person?
So that's gonna vary based on what the temp position is. Even within the positions, and I'm speaking from recent experience where we had a temp who was absolutely fabulous. And so when we reached out to the temp agency, we had to say, what type of areas do I need this person to have expertise in? And based on that is what they sent a rate back to us at. So someone else could have needed someone doing something similar, but they would have needed different expertise. I needed someone who was very strong in Word and Excel, and they gave me a quote based on that.
And my final question is, as we look at workforce development and our technical colleges and universities, say a graduating class or students that are looking for work, are we having those conversations with the colleges to build that pipeline to maybe a career field to where they can come work for the city of Fayetteville?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I was with the workforce development folks probably about 2 weeks ago, and we discussed several programs that they have available to us. And actually, that conversation was more focused on our fleet program. and our fleet mechanics that we're in so badly in need of. And so we are talking with them. We're trying to get some programs together, partner with them, anything we can do.
Yeah, so not necessarily a conversation with workforce development, the conversations with the colleges and universities, Methodist, FTCC, Fayetteville State University.
Yes, I've been to FTCC. We're also working with all of them regarding internships, even out at Fort Bragg, military folks transitioning out. I'm meeting with them and trying to get those partnerships and relationships in place so we can have that pipeline coming in.
Thank you.
All right, before I go to Councilman McKinson, then I'll need you all to kind of articulate, I hope this was just for presentation purposes, or you weren't looking for any resolution, because we still have a lot of open-ended information that we're working on. Before we go to that, just to your point, Councilmember, did talk to the Chancellor at FSU, and they have a real aggressive paid internship program that they're looking for partners with, which, again, builds that pipeline. So a number of governmental agencies and corporations are doing paid interns, and we need to expand that beyond fleet. You know, IT could probably use a few young, savvy computer science majors from some of these schools. But I'll go to Councilman McKinson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. The question I have is for the seasonal temporary employees, what age, just on record, what age are those, the average of the age or the age of those seasoned employees?
That's a great question. I know with lifeguards particularly, a lot of them are around 16 years of age, and the reason why I know that is because their parents have to come in and sign some stuff for us before we can allow them to work. My guess is probably a lot of the scorekeepers, but I also know that there's some older workers, some retired folks that work with Parks and Rec also on a seasonal basis. So kind of a smattering of everything, but mostly young people, I guess.
Okay, so I don't want to open up a can of worms on this, but I'm going to say this. If we have seasonal temporary employees, and let's say we hire a 16-year-old, and we're already having the conversation of wages and getting to $15, there's a concern, I will say, that a 16-year-old would be making the same as someone working as a full-time employee for the city. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Right, and all of them are not 16, so you all want to get the demographics of that? Because I talked to some 50-pluses that have a real-life obligations at that point. So be interested to know how many 16s you have versus not. But if it's a policy change standard, you know, then, you know, you fill the gap with who the best qualified is, so. But I guess
Mr.
that's.
Mayor, when you have a chance, I'd like to close out on this
Okay,
before we move on.
all right. Any other questions, council? All right, Mr. Manager.
Yeah, I want to say thank you, council, for the feedback. Last year, when Jerry came to us, we understood that there was a missing element to our conversations heretofore with the council, and that is when he came up with the employer of choice and the pillars. And if you could put that back up very briefly. And one of the things that we asked the council for last year was support in the budget to do the compensation study that Evergreen Solutions has done for us. And it just did not escape us that, and I've had conversations with a few of you that our temporary seasonal were not at 15. I've had that conversation, and it was fairly clear that it was around trying to make sure that we didn't have that compression issue that Councilmember Kinston alluded to. But at any point, it means a lot to me, and it means a lot to our employees, even seasonal, temporary, or full-time, part-time, that the council cares about their ability to live, work, and recreate in the community too. And so your full-throated support, again, of $15 an hour, even for seasonal and temporary, is really important. And I would be remiss again if I didn't close and remind you that this solution, while we're very excited about it, it takes us partially to where we know we need to go based upon the data that Evergreen has given us. The vacancy rates that we talked about at 14%. I came here in 2004, and there were weeks that we've had no vacancies and for city jobs. The economy has changed, the world has changed, but the labor market is incredibly tough. Not only are we adjusting wages, but we're also offering recruitment incentives. We're also offering retention incentives. And again, it means a lot to me and it means a lot to the staff to hear the council again make the commitment to us not only becoming but remaining an employer of choice. So thank you for that. We hear you very clearly about the seasonal and temporary. That doesn't need to come back. That's I think we understood that clearly, but we will give you the numbers when as part of our Budget Chronicles conversation that we running list of questions and answers. So we'll be able to provide you with what that would cost. But thank you.
All right, last question before we let you go. Did this 4% include senior management team all the way to the top, 4% across the board?
It includes all employees, as historically all of our merit pay increases have. Yes, sir. Every,
Council.
yes, sir.
Okay.
Every
Yeah.
single one.
All right, and that, okay. All right, thank you. That's the agenda. Thank you all. Thank you. All right, item 5.3, Pierce City sales tax information.
So, start this again.
Mayor, I actually may have told you something wrong. The senior leadership team is in line for the 4% in council, but the manager and the attorney, we only get whatever you would deem would be appropriate when you finish our evaluations.
Yeah, I thought we had a separate conversation for you all.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So I just wanted to reiterate something that we touched on in our small group meetings and that the city manager touched on Monday night in his presentation about our sales tax revenue projections. So for fiscal year 2021, our actuals were $52.36 million. That's what we actually received at year end. For the current year original budget, we budgeted $50.62 million. So our original budget was less than what we actually received, which we did not know what we were going to receive when we did our budget for 22. We hadn't finished out fiscal year 21. Our projection for the end of this year is $57.38 million, which is again 9.6 above fiscal year 2021 actuals and 13.3% above our budget for the current year. And for next year, we're projecting $59.67 million, which is a slow in the growth, but still indicating strong growth of 4% above our FY22 projection, and is 17.9% above the fiscal year 2022 budget. And now we'll talk about our Pierce City comparison information. You guys have a bigger handout of this at your seats. But just to give you a heads up and a little bit of insight as to where our peer cities are, the 10 cities that, 10 largest municipalities in North Carolina. If you look at that first column right here, the tax rate one, all the numbers highlighted in yellow indicate an increase from the previous year. So as far as the adopted tax rates, what's being proposed, 5 of our peers are increasing their ad valorem tax rates. 4 of our peers are increasing their annual stormwater fee. No one is increasing their vehicle license tax, but 6 of them are increasing their annual solid waste fee. When we did the analysis and collected this information, Raleigh is increasing their ad valorem tax rate by 2 cents per $100 evaluation, and they did indicate that that was to support their employee compensation and critical operation needs for core services. Durham is going up 6 cents per $100 evaluation, and they again indicated that was for employee compensation. Wilmington's increase is 1.42 cents, and again, the prevailing theme of employee compensation. They were also adding a small amount for some CIP items and for affordable, 1.42 cents per $100 evaluation, yes, sir. CIP items and affordable housing in addition to the employee compensation. High Point's increasing 3%, or 3 cents, sorry, not percent, 3 cents. And then they did not disclose what their increase was related to, as well as Winston-Salem is increasing 2.3 cents, and they will be presenting their budget, I think, next week to their board, and they have not given out any information as to what that 2.3 cents is specifically for or related to. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Redding to give you an update on ARPA. Or did you have any questions? I'm
Councilmember
sorry.
Dawkins, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Quickly, tell me, Ms. Oliveira, why our sales tax revenue, what comprises that rise? Is it more grocery store revenue? Is it more, do you get a breakdown for online or Amazon, or, we don't know why this sales tax revenue,
We
do
don't,
we?
yeah, we don't get it broken down into that granular of a level of detail. We do get it broken down by what is point of sale and what is per capita. And point of sale is doing much better than per capita, the per capita collection on the articles that we receive. But as far as, is it point of sale in grocery stores? Is it point of sale online? Is it point of sale some other place? We don't get that level of detail. I will tell you that the North Carolina League of Municipalities, our projections are very much in line with what they're projecting for the state. We're slightly below them for our year-end projection, and pretty much neck and neck with them for next year's projection.
The one point I'm wanting to make is I met with a retailer, brick and mortar retailer today, and he told me that his internet sales were up like 400% over last year. So my point is, if retailers out there, brick and mortar, get in the internet business to also set up your website and sell, because it helps your city, and which helps our citizens. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, and I think that maybe last year, year before last, right before COVID, there was a change in the legislature. There was a suit that took place in another state, but we followed to get online sales in the jurisdiction that the people live. So I think we are getting some
Yes,
of
sir.
those revenues.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
We do get revenues from internet sales. Yes,
All
sir.
right. Yes, ma'am.
Any other questions about the peer cities or the sales taxes?
That's it for now. Some are coming. Don't worry.
I'm ready. I'll turn it over to Mr. Redding then.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I am Brooke Redding, Special Project Manager from CMO, City Manager's Office. So the City Manager asked me to come tonight and provide a quick update as a reminder to Council of the $40 million of ARPA money that was dispersed and pushed down to our local government. So just quickly to go off the slide, we were awarded $40.2 million. That tranche was initially issued last year. The next one's on its way. In September of last year, Mayor Colvin did establish the council committees to produce policy framework. We moved it into November. The ACMs walked with the committees to establish essentially these 3 tranches plus 1. And so the business and economic vitality, the housing community livability, the infrastructure and community reinvestment, and then an administrative chunk there. So on the business and economic vitality, that $5 million has pretty much exclusively gone to Chris Culley's staff at ECD to issue out these programs. And just as an update on those programs, the COVID Small Business Response Grant, that's $2 million carved out of that $5 million, is launching on July 1st. The Child Care Assistance Grants will be launching on July 1st. The Commercial Corridor Improvement Program, which was expanded and then added to, will be launching again on July 1st. And those workforce development programs are currently being planned and worked through and coming back to council around August or September in a few months. The Housing and Community Livability Program, or that group, $4 million is going into the Housing Trust Fund. And I believe Mr. Cawley spoke to council at the last meeting where you allocated some other form of federal monies towards that Housing Trust Fund. So these are going to continue to stack up in that fund for him to use and pull developers in the city and build affordable housing complexes. And then there's $1 million out of there that's carved out for the Community Development Center. That's in the works right now with Chris's staff and the CMO to come back to council with some options and some suggestions and have that discussion. The last group was the Infrastructure and Community Reinvestment $5 million fund. That is where we're working right now with the city manager's office, myself, our consultants, iParametrics, the finance, and several other departments, the budget office. And so what we're doing is we're taking the CIP, TIP funded items and unfunded items. We're identifying what can qualify for ARPA money and replacing it with that and pulling that $5 million back to use for matching grants, which is that competitive grant strategy bullet you see there. While we've just started spinning up that competitive grant process, right now on our radar, we have an airport expansion opportunity that we're going to be looking to apply to. We're looking at a safe streets and sidewalks for all grant program, which focuses on road and sidewalk safety. And we're also looking at community safety initiatives to enhance PD's capability and other community-based violence prevention methods. And so that $5 million that gets carved out of the CIP, TIP will be used to match grant those grants that are out there. And there's a lot of money that has come down from the federal government. That final one was the administration of $5 million. In December, we did just over $3 million of premium pay to all employees of the city. That remaining balance is there, and we're currently identifying some cybersecurity and some other types of elements that are in the CIP, TIP that we can use those funds to enhance, but still on the deck. Pending your questions, that's what I've got on this slide.
All right, we do have some. Councilmember Herron and Kinston, then Colvin.
Thank you, Mayor. On the community safety initiatives, and I know what we have been moving forward with over the last, I guess, few months, were there any other initiatives that you're able to tell us what they are, or is it what we've been dealing with and what's been brought to us through the reports we've been receiving from the police department?
Yes, sir. So the community safety initiatives, there's a series of grants that the federal government has in different areas from the different agencies in the executive branch. Chief Hawkins and her staff have been identifying which grants could work, which fall underneath the grouping of safety strategies that she's brought to council before. So I can think of one that focuses on the community-based violence interrupters.
Okay,
that's the kind of programs we're looking at to apply to.
Okay, I didn't know if it was something that we weren't aware of. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
All right, Councilmember Kinston.
I think you may have just answered the question, but I want to make sure. Can you give the description again of what's under the Community Development Center? What that one?
So that has to come back to council. We're currently identifying, when council allocated this in the process with the ACMs, you said we want to put $1 million towards Community Development Center or Community Center. And we've looked at the different areas across the city. Mr. Cawley is currently evaluating that and developing items to bring back to council and have that discussion on what y'all want to do. Does that answer your question, ma'am?
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. For Councilman Wright, so the employee premium pay, that was the bonus, one-time bonus?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And so council, as we look at this, because this will take a deeper conversation, one, just to make sure that the projects that the council determines after they come back and give us that, I think we will need to put some specifics into the budget adoption. So it may require a special meeting before June 30 to talk about the projects in more detail. So just to make sure that everyone captures, some of the things that we're trying to capture. So I'll look to you for some guidance, possibly, depending on how much progress we make at the next budget work session, if there's a third one needed. But prior to budget adoption, definitely wanted to put you aware that we'll call a special meeting to kind of talk through some of these projects so we can get that specifically programmed into the budget adoption process. So just wanted to put that out there. Also, too, just to make sure I'm understanding this, Brooke, I understood that out of the 40 million, understand we only received the first tranche, there were projects that were already being funded through the CIP process. So they were in upcoming years, but each year out of the 5.6 cents, we were allocating that to cover those things in the CIP. So when an exchange was made for those items in the CIP, do you have a list of what items came off of the CIP? And how did that impact what the 5.06 cents was going to fund if you had a reduction in that? And where is that addition, where are those additional dollars?
So those additional dollars are maintained in our assigned fund balance. We are not permitted to spend them on anything other than capital funding projects, capital funding plan projects, whether it is what we currently have identified or whether it's something we identify in the future. We can spend them on a grant match for a capital project that we receive a grant, but those dollars are in essence in a savings account within our own accounting system.
Okay, so let me reframe it a different way. So in last budget year, we had a 14.33% fund balance
Yes, sir.
without ARPA.
Yes, sir.
This year, we have a 12.78% fund balance with the 40 million, or 20 of it, or the 15 that was used to replace certain things. So in other words, just to simplify it so I'm tracking, 15 million came in to replace things we were already trying to figure out how to fund. Some of it was funded, some of it was in the process of being funded annually. So therefore, that's an additional 15 influx. So why did the fund balance go down?
So our ARPA funding is not included in our general fund.
Okay, so
It
you've
is-
got that in a separate account, even though,
Yes, sir. That
Okay.
is in a multi-year capital project account.
okay, so it's
Because-
that identified as what now?
It's a multi-year capital project account, the ARPA funding is.
Where's that listed on, when you list the funds in
It
the
is
budget?
not in the budget. That is not an annual operating account that council would appropriate. That is a capital project account or a special revenue project account that council appropriates individually, independent of the budget process.
Okay, so where is that gonna be seen in the overall big picture of the budget?
So in the overall big picture of the budget, that is seen in the assigned fund balance amount.
In the 12.78?
So in the.
That's the unassigned,
the-
12.78.
The unassigned is not where it is.
I
It's in
understand
the
that.
assigned fund
Okay.
balance, yes. Our assigned fund balance has increased significantly because we are not projecting to use only a slight portion of our money in the coming 5-year funding plan. We will adjust that as we get confirmation from our consultants about what we can use our ARPA funding on.
Okay,
And so that, similar to years past, but slightly different from years past, our CIP and TIP document is really going to be a living, breathing plan. It's not gonna be static in that we set it and we try to, move through and accomplish these projects. We're going to be looking at those projects very frequently during the course of the coming year, especially as we finalize and you finalize what we're gonna be spending those ARPA dollars on, what federal capital grants we're going to be pursuing, and how much of the match we're going to need. So what we can fund, because we can't use ARPA dollars for grant matches, we can use our assigned fund balance.
yeah, so where is the total of our assigned fund balance? That's what I'm asking.
Let me grab, hold
Yeah.
on.
Mr. Mayor, while she's looking for that, on the screen in front of you, the $20 million, $5 million is CIP, TIP funding. $5 million was the premium pay, which was already moved. And then on the business and economic vitality, you've got the COVID grants, the child care assistance grants, the corridor improvements, workforce development programs, housing trust fund under the other group. And so that is how that $20 million got spent. And of that, I'd be able to say that 15 million of that is moving. It's the 5 million that we are parking in assigned fund balance to use, as Kelly mentioned. But the other funds, you should see those monies being deployed.
All right, while she's getting that, I'll go to Councilmember Hare, Kinston, and Wright, and then I have Davis Ingram here. I already have here. Okay, all right, so Councilmember Hare?
Okay, thank you, Mayor. I was just trying to talk with Jay on the sidebar. The commercial quarter improvement program, that $1 million that we have, and I know it states that it's going in to do the improvements. I was just trying to get some specifics. I know what we've been doing, but are there any detailed specifics where what that was supporting?
So none of this is appropriated. That's that meeting I was talking about for council to decide what that looks like, what workforce and.
So that's another meeting we need to have.
Yes, sir.
The way it
A
looks.
special
Okay.
meeting just for
Okay.
that. Yes, sir.
Okay.
So if I, excuse me, if I could, Mr. Mayor, if you recall and you see on the slide there, back in April, we actually came to the council to talk about the recommendations, and we did receive consensus that these are the strategies we wanted to move forward with those buckets. Within those buckets, for example, you just mentioned the commercial corridor program. That's an existing program that we have now. So what we wanted to do is leverage the existing program we have now and funnel additional money, because that actually is an eligible use. And if I could.
So did the criteria change to where it included more? Like, I think the council still will need, I
The
understand you want to
details
use.
of the program, right.
They'll
The
need to
details
still.
of how we can expand the
Right.
program? Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Absolutely. And the other piece, if I have the opportunity to, I know there was a conversation about the Community Development Center, I believe from Councilmember Kinston. If you recall, in that Housing and Community Livability Committee, one of the things that was of interest of the council was how we can build up community capacity and support the nonprofits. Well, one of the eligible uses that we realized is to actually invest some capital cost into supporting a type of center. That's what the Community Development Center would be. We do not have a location or anything like that, but obviously it will be an opportunity that we can actually have a roof and an opportunity so we can have co-located facility, that we can have some type of coordinated services delivery within the community. And that was kind of the premise behind that, and that also is an eligible use. But as far as the delivery model, that's something that is yet to be designed.
All right. Councilmember Kinston,
Thank you, Mayor. I'm good. I understand the assignment.
Councilmember Wright.
Yeah, so my question is, probably, you guys have put out so much information, and I'm getting an understanding of that we still have a lot of planning and, to do with this 20 million, but the question is, the monies that's being put aside, just like the Housing Trust Fund, once that money is put aside, and I think you mentioned you could use our monies for grants, but you cannot use the ARPA money for the grants. So once this money is allocated, can it be used for anything else other than what has been allocated for?
So are you referring to the ARPA
ARPA
fund?
money.
Yes, sir. So as projects are identified and as you guys approve the projects, we will come to you with specific project appropriations for that project. As we move through the completion of the project, that level of budget or level of money that you want to put toward that project may change. We may find out we need more money for that project or less money. And just like you do any other capital project or special revenue project, the council can change that appropriation amount through an ordinance amendment at any time that you choose.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
I think all my other questions have been answered, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Davis. Councilmember Ingram.
Thank you. Thank you for that explanation on the Community Development Center. As a caveat to that, over near Campbell Ave, there is a community center. Could we utilize that to cut down on and utilize funding somewhere else?
Given that I'm not.
The resource center.
Right.
Yes.
Right. I would defer to our consultant to ensure that that would be an eligible use. It's my understanding that for this particular funding, it would be capital, that it's not necessarily for operation, but it's a capital cost.
Thank you. And then my next question is about the commercial corridor improvement, adding that money to our corridors. I understand that we are aggressively making sure that we address our Murchison Road corridor. However, we do have other corridors within the city, and I know that the Corridor Revitalization Committee has said as well that they believe that attention should also still go to the other corridors. So I just want to kind of restate that I do hope that this additional money can put some love into the other corridors of the city.
Absolutely, ma'am. I appreciate you asking that question or making that statement. Just as for those who haven't remembered, we try to continue to tell council as we're moving forward that we have 6 neighborhood redevelopment areas that we want to focus on across the community. And with this ARPA funding, we are trying to make sure that all this funding goes into designated census tracts, qualified designated census tracts.
Okay, and I brought this up.
They will overlap with the same.
Thank you. I did bring this up in our small group meetings, and so I'm gonna express it here. When it comes down to infrastructure and community reinvestment, I'm interested, I know we did work or study about traffic calming measures, and I see it says roads and sidewalk safety. I would like to get a better understanding that is that also going to encompass the traffic calming measures as well? Like I know we talked about more speed humps and street things that rumble. Yeah, I can't remember the name. Stripes. There you go. The strips. So I would like to know if that would, and I think in my session I was more concerned about the school zone areas where there are a lot of youth activity. So can I get an understanding on what you?
Yes, so the road and sidewalk safety bullet point there.
Yeah. Now, specific projects, we're gonna,
What I'm
high
not
level,
asking, Mr. Mayor, I'm not asking for specific projects. I'm asking, do you envision that traffic calming? Because we've not received anything on it since it came up.
Yeah, a lot of it is in the budget.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Ingram,
Mr. Mayor.
let's not do this today.
No,
Hold on a
sir.
second.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Ingram, point of order. We're having a high-level discussion. If
And
we
I
start down,
understand that,
excuse me,
Mr.
hold
Mayor.
on 1 second. If we start down the road of specific projects,
I'm not
everybody
talking
has
about
that.
specific projects. I'm talking about traffic calming measures.
That
Okay.
bullet point is speaking to a grant opportunity, ma'am, and that grant opportunity does have elements of that in the type of application we could make, but that's not necessarily an initiative. It's something we've identified and put on the radar based off conversations you previously had.
Thank you.
All right. Council, any other questions? All right. So council will look to, we'll see what's convenient. I have the clerk coordinate special meeting date to kind of talk about specifics that we didn't
Mr.
get into
Mayor?
tonight.
Well, Mr.
Sir?
Mayor, before we talk about that, I'm not sure, based upon what Brooke and others shared, what we would have for you before June 30th. If this is a multi-year account, when you look at the screen, go back one more, but look at the screen, the only projects that we talked about really are the ones within the $5 million and the CIP, TIP. And so the safest way to look at that is to look at the CIP and TIP of what was planned to be funded. And we hope to swap, if we can't swap another funding source, but these are not new projects. And
Well,
so,
yeah, understand, but there is a significant interest of council to talk and give clarity as to what type of projects. So, and we haven't had that discussion, even with the committees. We asked everybody to hold that off until budget time. We're at budget time, and so we didn't want to mix that up with tonight's discussion, which is basically had its pre-planned agenda. So there will probably need to be a separate conversation of council, which you can kind of explain in that detail. But council will also be able to tell you some of the specific things in those areas that they're looking to do with some of the ARPA funding.
Yes, sir. We did cover the CIP and TIP, and that may be a great, if we can bring that back to the second work session as well. That would be part of that 5 million, and then it may be, I'm trying to just.
Well, what would be helpful then, because on the one hand, we're saying that the specifics haven't been determined, they're yet to be determined, that we're gonna do a workforce development program, but we don't know what, commercial corridor, but we don't know what, community development center, but we don't have details. You've identified specific things that are coming off the CIP that do have descriptions to it, that you're saying you're gonna swap non-specific things out with. So there will need to be a meeting to reconcile those two differences.
Yes, sir. Some of those things, and this is what we're kind of in the process of doing right now, Mr. Redding has gotten the specifics of those projects, and he is talking with our consultant to see, are they ARPA eligible, and under what umbrella of ARPA eligibility they would fall.
But in order for him to make that determination, you have to have given him something specific to say, is this thing eligible for ARPA?
Yes, sir. The project sheets that were included in the CIP and TIP are what the consultant.
So I'm fairly certain, Council, that we will need a meeting before that's adopted, because when you adopt the budget, you adopt the CIP and TIP, correct?
We do as a living document that you guys can change at any time. What we will not be adopting is an appropriation for those projects using ARPA funding.
Well, yeah.
Which is different.
And I understand. So
we
now
had
on the process
done.
piece, but I'm saying
Right.
from the council members I talked to, because we know after you adopt the budget and something's in the budget, that it is a lot more work to it, to deal with it then than it is before it's put in the budget.
Well, so we do an annual budget appropriation, which is the operating budget. The bulk of what you have in that book is the annual operating budget. How the CIP and TIP factor into that is that we need to transfer our own money, what is reserved in fund balance or what we're projecting to receive as our 5.07 cents in the coming year, to the specific projects that are being funded by it. So that's how it relates to our annual operating budget. If we're, like with our transit grants, projects that are funded using transit grants are included in the CIP. Your adoption of the CIP and TIP plan is just that. You're saying, yes, this is a plan that we want staff to pursue at this point in time. You are not appropriating funding unless we bring that appropriation action with you. And the same as we would not do with a grant until we have identified that grant funding as being available to us. We will not do that with anything that we have listed as potential ARPA funding.
So we're clear on that,
Okay.
but would you agree that in section J, where the CIP and TIP items are, it gives a funding source?
Yes, sir.
Right. So the funding source comes from the adopted budget, right?
No, sir.
So when we adopt the budget, and you said that you're gonna pay for this project out of general fund, for instance, that's a part of this, correct?
It is, but it's a plan. It is not.
Right, I understand.
Right.
Yeah,
So-
but we may need that for clarity, because there's a lot of interest on council, and they've been anticipating to have that conversation, so.
Sure.
So we'll get back with you and
And Mr.
schedule
Mayor,
something.
Sir. In the interim, if you will, I'll ask Brooke or Jay to send out a particular email to you. One of the things I think that would be helpful is the process that you went through with the three assistants, where you, in the committees, and y'all came up with the framework, and then you vetted and ranked in the groups and as a council the projects that you see and the types that you have in front of you. Y'all have done the heavy lifting. Y'all did that. And you've already broken down the money, for instance, the child care assistance grants. Y'all have done that. What would probably be also helpful, though, is it appears that there is something that is missing, that y'all are interested in doing that is not on this list at all. And it would be helpful if you know what you want to do, if when we email you, if you could let us know, then we can decide whether or not that is something that possibly at a high level is an ARPA issue, or is something where it was a miss that we didn't
Well,
catch
I think
in
the
the
council's
CIP.
got to get a consensus, because you may get 10 different things.
And I would welcome that.
Right,
I would
right.
welcome 10, because that's the brainstorming we need. For instance, right now, someone wants to do a pool. I mean, not a pool, but a natatorium, Right now, there are people who would be interested in us buying up an old apartment building and doing transitional housing. The more, even if it's 10 separate emails, if you give it to us and we're able to put it on the board, then it helps us work through it, because we thought we had captured exactly what you wanted, and it is in broad enough details so that as we work on workforce development
Right.
programs, whether that's a reentry council type program for people returning from prison,
Right.
or whether it's a youth internship, mentorship program that you've talked about, it's flexible enough. And now that we have it, all we need to do is come back with the details.
Understood, understood. So it may take a meeting for us to do that, but certainly welcome council to send any ideas that they have, and we'll see how the next phase of the budgeting goes. I mean, last thing we want to do is have a mundane meeting, but sometimes we have to, have that discussion, and we have several council members that's been waiting a long time for it. So it is time for whatever staff recommendations, because I think when we did these committees, that was back in the fall or the end of '21. So they told us they would have some more detailed project lists. So we're looking to have that conversation pretty soon. So, and we know there's no time like the budget time to, kind of get some attention. So,
Absolutely.
council, any? Yeah.
Motion adjourned.
All right. Y'all have a good evening.